Hello, everyone. I got a question today that I thought would be interesting to try out, and I really couldn't sleep because I was pretty sure that I was able to solve the problem using a tool that I built um, uh, a couple of years back called CRM Snapshot. It's currently owned by Cobalt, based out of Arlington, Virginia, and I the use case was interesting to me because wasn't something I had ever thought about before, and I actually wanted to record a video real quick to see if it was possible to do what um, this person was asking to do using CRM Snapshot. So the use case is we've got a organizationally owned entity and we want to convert that to a user owned entity. And there's some solutions to doing that. You can create another entity and inside of Dynamics that is user owned, or just another entity, a holding entity, for example, where you could copy the data from the original entity over to the holding entity, delete the original entity, recreate it with all the same fields, and then move that data back. So there's two problems with that. One is it's a lot of steps to recreate the entity two times, and the other step is using some tool to move that data between those two entities. So the nice thing about Snapshot is it actually takes care of that moving of data for you. It also takes one step out of the process of recreating the entity. So you're still recreating the entity when you're recreating it as a user owned as opposed to an organizationally owned. However, you're not creating a holding entity in the meantime, and you're also not having to deal with the migration process. So you could export that data out to SQL, but then you'd have to write some SSIS packages to move that from SQL into the new entity, things like that. Snapshot would make this a lot more simple. There's really no hacks. There's no ability for you to take an organizationally owned entity and convert it to a user owned entity. So I was gonna go ahead and actually show how you would do this for those of you who are interested. So to get started, and I'm gonna take this from the ground up. So I'm gonna create a new solution here, and it's gonna be our conversion solution. That'll work. Give it a number and go ahead and create that. All right, so we're going to create our entity that is organizationally owned, and we're going to call it our conversion entity. Sure. And its multiple name would be our conversion entities. That looks good. We'll leave everything as it is. We're going to go ahead and associate some activities with it. That's fine. This isn't necessary. The one thing about Snapshot, CRM Snapshot, is it actually what it does is it creates point in time backups of records. In order to see those point in time backups inside of the record that you're backing up, you would need to enable activities for that entity so you can actually see it in the activity feed. It's not necessary. You can still create snapshot backups of records that don't have activities associated with them, but for this demo we're going to go ahead and we're going to enable activities. All right, so we have our conversion entity. One of the other tricky things about this process is making sure that you maintain relationships within the entity. So in our case, we're gonna go ahead and add an end to one with contacts. Those are pretty easy to handle. Even if you exported all your data into Excel and then re-imported it, you probably make that work somehow with the standard import tools, or some of the other tools that are out there. Lookups are pretty easy to handle. The difficult things to handle are those one-to-N relationships. So, and I'm going to show creating that and actually restoring that as well. So we've got our end-to-one relationship with the contact. So there's going to be a contact lookup on our entity. This looks good. We'll create that. All right, and I'm gonna really quick, I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna add our contact field to the form because we're gonna want to be able to see that. Save and close that. And now I'm gonna jump over to, and let's do it from here. So I'm gonna get a one-to-N relationship. I'm gonna add a new one-to-many, and in this case it's gonna be our account. And in this case, it's going to be the relationship is going to be our conversion entity. And the full name of that is our conversion entity ID. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that off so we don't lose that. That looks good. So now we have a one-to-many relationship to our new entity. In particular, custom one-to-many. And that should be good. All right, so let's jump over to Advanced Find. Look up our conversion entities. So we have none of them. I'm going to go ahead and create a couple. So it's test one. It does not look like my form updated, so let me jump in here, publish that. And we'll tie that to Jim Smith. Let's create a couple more. Test 2, this will be tied to Nancy. That one's also tied to Nancy. Let's give it to somebody else. And for test 3, I'm going to link this to an existing account. All right, so we have our end-to-ones, we've got our one-to-ends, we've got a poorly named test 3, and now, obviously in a real world situation we'd have more records than this, but in this case we have 3. So I'll show you essentially how you would run this against more records than 3. You could, the way that Snapshot works, or CRM Snapshot, you can see we've got it already installed here, and you can download it from the Cobalt's website. The way that it works, though, is it's all workflow driven. So what we need to do first is we need to create a workflow for backing up these records. Because ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to back up test 1, test 2, test 3, and all of its child relationships, and store that in our snapshot activities. And then we're going to delete this entity from the schema, recreate it as it was, and restore those records. So in order to do that, we need to create a backup conversion entity workflow. Workflow. This is against our conversion entity. We're going to run that in the background. You could also run it as synchronous if you wanted to. And get rid of that trigger, set it as an on-demand process. And what we want is Cobalt Snapshot, and we want configurable backup. So there's a couple of different options in here. There's configurable backup, configurable clone, so you can also clone records with Snapshot. Some of these other ones are internal specific to the Snapshot software. Standard backup, standard clone. There should be no reason to ever use these. These are kind of a holdover from previous versions. So these are the two main functions. And these give you the ability to back up records, back up their child records, back up child records of child records, and so on. So you can actually move your way through the hierarchy of parent-child relationships and back up specific things. You can do the same thing with the clone, which is really powerful. So you have the ability to clone records and their child records and their grandchild and so on and so forth. So, but we're specifically focused on the backup. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and add that as a step. Oh, I've added it twice now. Get rid of one of those. And we'll just call this backup record. If you click set properties, that'll give you the ability to specify how you want to back up these records and what specific child records you want to back up. So in this case, this is backup records. I'm not feeling very original. Our name of our entity is our conversion entity. And in this case, we actually want to back up. We want to back up our conversion entity. We also want to back up our account entity. And the reason being is that we're interested, there's going to be a lookup to the account, or I'm sorry, there's going to be a lookup to our conversion entity on the account. And when you delete our conversion entity and you delete that relationship, that data goes away. So when we delete our conversion entity and we subsequently recreate it, we're going to need to recreate this relationship, and because that won't exist anymore. And we're also going to want to restore the data associated with that. Like I said, you can actually drill into this. So if you wanted to back up any of the related records to the account, you could also do that. In our case, all we're concerned about is this account. You maybe, since we enabled activities, if there's activities actually associated with our conversion entity, you could back those up too to make sure that they come along for the ride. All right, so that looks good. I'm gonna not go into what this is, but essentially the idea here is that you can exclude fields so that if there are specific fields that you don't want to back up or restore, you could exclude them here. So in this case, we want to restore everything as it was before, so we're not going to exclude anything, but you could add them here. All right, so that looks good. That's our instructions, and that's all we need to do for here. Go ahead and activate. And we'll jump back over to Advanced Find. We've got our conversion entities here. What I'm going to do is show you, obviously, like I said, this is in a real world situation. I only have 3 records here. You could actually use the bulk workflow execution tool inside of XRM Toolbox to do this. So I've created a personal view of snapshots created today. So we're going to run our workflow against snapshots, or excuse me, not true. We're actually going to run this workflow against our, so let me refresh this. Our backup. Did not refresh. Select. Oh, there it is. Backup conversion entity. Okay, so I'm going to run this against all of our active backup conversion entities. Start that. There's 3 of them. Same 3 that we just saw in the advanced find. If I drill into one of these and look at the background processes, you can see our backup conversion is in progress. So we'll give that a second to finish. And it's finished. All right. So what do we have? If I go look at snapshots in the system, you can see we've got 4 snapshot records. We have 3 for our conversion entity, and we actually have 1 for our account entity. So this was the account that was associated with this conversion. And we back that up specifically because we want that one-to-end relationship to restore. So there's our backup of all of our data. At this point, we can actually go in to Dynamics. And the great thing about the bulk workflow execution is you can run this against thousands of records, as opposed to the 3 that I ran it against, and it'll it'll give you the ability to back up pretty much all of the data in an entity that you need to. All right, so at this point, the first thing I need to do is I need to deactivate this workflow I just created. I backed up all my records, and I need to delete this as well, because it's going to be a dependency of the entity when we go to delete the entity itself. Let's go to solutions. Here's our conversion solution. And if we go to entities, the other thing we're going to have to do here is delete our relationship to the account. So if we go to 1 to n, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. We never added that as a field on the form in the account, so we should be able to delete it. If we didn't, then trying to delete the entity, it would raise that as an issue dependency. And now I'm going to delete our entity. So we've backed up all of the data that was in this entity. We're now deleting the schema from the solution. We're going to recreate it with the same schema. And again, the step this saves is you don't have to go in and recreate the entity as a separate entity with a different name and then move it back. So you don't have to take that extra step. You also don't have to build the SSIS packages, things like that, to move that data between one entity or the other. If you're doing this on-prem, you may be able to get away with that just using SQL, straight SQL. In online, it would be much more difficult, and this could help out. So I've deleted the entity. I'm going to go ahead and recreate it. So this is our conversion entity. The one thing that this solution expects is that your entity the schema of your entity is going to be identical to the original. Obviously we're going to change organizationally owned to user or team owned, but the schema name of your entity, the schema name of your fields, and things like that need to be identical so that the snapshots can be restored as they are. If you rename a field, basically what's going to happen is that data is not going to get restored. It's not going to blow out. It's not going to have a problem with that. However, you're just not going to be able to get that data out, and there are workarounds for that as well. The snapshot records are stored as XML in the system. You could go in and modify the XML to specify the new schema name of the field if you wanted to, and then run the restore. But we'll get to that, how you go about doing that. All right, so here's our entity. Save that. We need to recreate the relationships as they were before. All right. So, let me do this the same way. So I'm going to create our contact lookup. Set that to contact. That's good. Our relationship to the account. And remember, we called this our conversion entity. And I know that because I actually copied that into Notepad earlier. And it has an ID on the end. So that looks good. That's all good. And the only thing else that we want to do here is go ahead and add our contact field so we can take a look at it. And you can see now we have an owner field because this is user owned or team owned. Publish that. And now the last step is to run another workflow against our snapshot records that we created. In particular, we're going to run the rollback workflow. So this comes installed already when you install Snapshot, the rollback child snapshots. There's also a merge option in there. I won't get into what the differences of these are. However, there is documentation on Cobalt's website about how to use these different workflows that come out of the box. We're going to use the rollback workflow in order to roll back our snapshots to the new entity that we just created. And we're going to use bulk workflow execution. Again, you could, the fact that we only have 3 or 4 snapshot records in the system, you could run it directly. You could run it directly from here just by going in and selecting the records and saying run workflow rollback. But if we had 1,000, we would want to do it through here, and I'm just going to say all snapshots in this case. That looks good. Start it up. It's going to run it against 4 of them. And we'll come back to our advanced find. Take a look at one of these, see if it's finished. Look at that, it's done. Nice. Let's see if this one ran. Yep. All right, great. So now all we have to do is go over to our conversion entities. Try that again. This is not what I wanted to see. Doesn't look like it updated with the latest version. There we go. All right, so one thing to notice, I should be in bed right now. It's 2:07 in the morning. It's not 2:07, it's 2:25 in the morning. However, 2:07 was when I created these records, so the created on is maintained, which is great. If we drill down into these, you'll see that the lookup is there. The owner is system. There was no owner to begin with, so the plugin that runs essentially takes ownership of it. You might need to do something additional to assign these things. But again, the fact that it's workflow driven gives you the ability to do that. So that's, kind of a nice feature there. If we look at accounts associated with test three, we should see, and we do, that the one-to-end relationships are also restored. So again, this simplifies a process that's not simple. And the standard way of doing it would be pretty painful, a lot of work, and we were able to do it in 25 minutes, and that's pretty good. So, um, you know, let me know your thoughts, and I appreciate you guys listening, and hopefully this was helpful. And yeah, I'm really glad that it actually worked. So, all right.